Good day. It's October 28th, 2023. And the themes I wanted to reflect on today are the two primary ways that we can orient to the divine. The first being silence, and the second being through the symbolic, through the image. So I was struck by a book on Meister Eckhart, exploring the symbolic in Meister Eckhart's teaching. Meister Eckhart, the medieval German theologian, whose life took place in linear time right after Ibn Arabi's life. And they both had similarities, a lot of shared similarities in their teachings. So in this book on Meister Eckhart, which I will link in the description, it was named that there are two ways of orienting to the divine. The first one is silence. In the non-dual spiritual contexts that I've practiced in, for example, such as on Rupert Spira's retreats, you could say that the heart of this teaching or orientation of silence is to be knowing oneself as this awareness, resting into this stillness or beingness in which one is not adding anything from the personality into this field of being. One is be stilling and finding in remembrance one's own true nature. We could describe this as a way of silence. As another reference in the Islamic teaching, there is a Islamic teacher from many hundreds of years ago who would say, had a saying, there's nothing to do but to sit under the stairs and pray 5 times a day. We could see this as in accordance with this way of silence, just conforming to the reality of the divine as it is. And I really appreciated in this book that a complementary way of orienting to the divine was validated. And that is the way through symbol or image. We could even say, well, we can use a Jungian term to using the active imagination to be in a receptive and co-creative relationship with the divine, to receive the unique individuated imagery that carries meaning for each of us uniquely as a source of inspiration and guidance for the differentiation and individuation of each of our lives, each of our unique beings. Personally, I have a sense of caution or question if we only focus on this way of silence. There is nothing lacking in the way of silence. However, each of us also exists in manifest cultural contexts. And for example, in a Western capitalist, materialist cultural context, the way of silence can sometimes reinforce a kind of quietism or passivity and lead to a lack of focus on the unique individuation of each being, and even the integration of that individuation through action, through calling, through purpose. The way of imagistic, symbolic, imaginal orientation to the divine also has its requirement for a rigorousness, because we need to have discernment about whether this imaginal orientation, this orientation of active imagination, we need to have discernment about whether it is contaminated by our conditioning, our ego. So I find it very helpful and valuable for engaging in the practice of ally work to have as a foundation this way of silence. Recently, I was speaking with a practitioner who had a strong foundation in the way of silence, in the knowing oneself as this awareness, as the nature of awareness. Like me, they also had a strong grounding in the Zen practice tradition. In Zen, there is an approach similar to what is described as neti, the via negativa, letting go of the conditioned letting go and being aware of conditioned patterns to rest in the nature of awareness. I was also struck by being in this conversation with this practitioner that in their orientation to what we can call ally work, to cultivating this relationship with the ally, the field from which they were speaking had a quality of clarity, of discernment. So I find this way of silence, of knowing oneself as awareness, as a beautiful foundation from which to engage in ally work. In my sleep last night, and currently I have a cold or some other cold-like condition in my nighttime hours, an insight arrived to me to describe ally work as direct dash indirect. Direct slash indirect. I'll unpack that. For example, the non-dual path, the path of non-duality, this knowing oneself as awareness, is often described as the direct path. One is letting go of practices, forms, to simply rest as this awareness. And this is all well and good, but again, this quietism or passivity can creep in. Through the symbolic, we are indirectly orienting to the divine. But in another sense, that is as direct as we can get. So if we see there being two direct paths, one is this way of silence, and one is this way of the symbolic. It is understood, for example, in the Islamic tradition, that we are incapable of perceiving God. We are incapable of knowing the essence of God. It is transcendent to our cognitive capability. So in that sense, it is impossible to directly perceive, to cognize the essence of the divine. As such, through this direct, indirect pathway of ally work, we orient to the symbolic. In this book on Meister Eckhart, an image of a golden chalice. Picture a golden chalice as a vessel in which our orientation to the divine focuses on that vessel, and it becomes an intermediary, what they would say in Islam or Ibn Arabi, it becomes an intermediary barzakh, a interplace, a meeting of two realms. This golden chalice, we orient to the divine through its symbolism, and at the same time, that symbolic form takes on the light, the meaning, the giving, the bestowing of the divine. It's like a virtualization. The virtualization isn't the real thing, but it manifests qualities of the real thing, qualities which convey meaning, real meaning. So there's a process of transduction, of transmission through the imaginal form. This is the practice of ally work. It's very important to hold all of this in a context of mystery, not knowing, or as the Persian philosopher would say, Suhrawardi, our knowing is a knowing by presence. We are not knowing in positivistic formulations, X is Y. We are knowing through presence, and this imaginal form is part of this field of presence as perceived through the active imagination, which, as Corban would describe, it's the heart, which is the organ that functions in engaging with the active imagination. In a very simple sense, we could say ally work is a practice of the heart. And that, in a sense, also contrasts it to, let's say, this way of silence or this way of knowing as awareness. For me, that form, or let's say my experience in non-dual contexts, there's a quality of what they call in Hinduism jnana yoga. I believe it's Jnana, the way of knowing, this active imagination through the heart implicitly carries a quality of compassion and gentleness and guidance and creativity, imagination and openness, possibility, perspective. It is a practice that encourages engagement, activation, and the individuation of each being through the actualization of the realization of knowing themselves as awareness. That I said a lot there, but to put it simply, this way of silence can allow us to recognize that we are this awareness. Ally work can allow us to actualize that, to integrate that understanding through our physical form, through our human existence. I'll give you one more metaphor. On this planet Earth, all living things' existence depends on the light of the sun. So in a sense, we are always in relationship to the sun, a symbol of God or the divine. And as I experienced recently in viewing an eclipse, it's not possible for us as humans to look directly at the sun. It would blind us. So this is the same understanding with God, that it is veiled. And these veils are not a way to reinforce our ignorance. These veils are a way to protect us from the overwhelming power of that light of the divine. So in our human civilizational culture, or going back to pre-civilization, there's always been these complementary dynamics, the sun and the moon, the solar and the lunar. This is a metaphor here, so excuse any looseness. We can't look directly at the sun, but we can see the light of the sun by looking at the moon. The light of the sun is reflected in the moon. And the moon isn't just a reflector of light, it has its own qualities, its own beingness, its own functionality. It moves the tides. Without the moon, life on Earth would also function differently. It also has imaginal meaning. The moon, what could be a more deep symbol to us as humans than the moon? In poetry, in cosmology, in our desire to extend the knowing of who we are by traveling to the moon, a whole cultural, global, civilization-orienting goal to land on the moon. So by way of metaphor, this way of silence is simply resting in the way that the sun is always the foundation for life-givingness, always completely dependent on it in this form of humanness. And then the moon, you'd say that full moon reflecting the light of the sun, is a way that we can find guidance in the darkness of the night. It's a complementary path to the solar. The light is indirect, but it is still the true light. It is indirect, but it is also direct. Thank you for your engagement and your interest, and wishing you peace and blessings.